Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking a minute to join us, and thanks for your patience as we got the slide deck pulled up here. Good afternoon and happy Friday to you all. Here, the first Friday in April. Mayor Zach Fruwink here at City Hall with Kyle Kearns in the third floor conference room at City Hall, and got a number of folks joining us remotely, practicing great social distancing in their remote workspaces or in their offices. Want to thank you for taking some time to join us for our third business briefing call. Appreciate you all coming together during this extraordinary time. As with past briefings, we'll do our best to address questions, and for those of you on our video or the app on their smartphones, there is a chat feature, so please enter your questions now or as they come up. We've also received a few questions in advance, and we'll get to those as we get through our speaking order this afternoon. We know that our strength as a community is found as a collective, working closely with our local, state, and federal partners. Last week we were joined by Congressman Kind to give a briefing on the federal stimulus situation. This dual crisis, both health and economic, requires us to battle on many fronts. And today we're joined by another partner, this time at the state level, Missy Hughes, who has been at the helm of WEDC, Wisconsin's lead economic development organization, for just over 5 months, by my count, Missy. And before joining WEDC in 2019, in October that year, she was General Counsel and Chief Mission Officer at Organic Valley. It's a great pleasure to welcome you, Missy, to our call during this very hectic time for all of us. And I'm going to go ahead and unmute your line so that way we can welcome you here. So. Thanks for taking some time out of your busy day on a Friday to provide a briefing and an update to all the folks in Wisconsin Rapids and beyond that might be joining our call.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much. And yesterday was 6 months, coincidentally April Fool's Day, so we're just not going to read too much into that right now. Did you want me to go ahead and just dive into some of the things that WEDC has been working on?
That'd be great. If you could share an update from your perspective, sure. And then we've got a few questions in the queue that we'll go ahead and get to so we can keep it interactive for you as well. So yeah, go ahead and please share an overview and update from your perspective.
So at WEDC, like I said, I've been on the job for 6 months, and I really spent the first 5 months or so getting to know the whole Wisconsin economy. So I've lived where I am right now in southwestern Wisconsin for 16 years, working for Organic Valley, which is a dairy cooperative. And, so I know the dairy industry quite well. I've worked for farmers for 16 years, and I began to really understand the rest of the Wisconsin economy and the diversity that it offers. So as the COVID-19 process and situation has come rolling towards us, I've really looked to understand what the impact has been like on the Wisconsin economy and that diversity. And if you think about it, it's really been kind of a tidal wave coming at us. The very first phase that we saw was the restrictions put on gatherings of 50 or more people. So that's where you see the impact on performance venues or movie theaters or things like that, larger restaurants. And then we saw the restriction on groups of 10 or more, no more than 10. And that's when you really saw the impact hit on those small businesses and the restaurants and the cafes around the state. And then with Safer at Home, of course, we've seen a much fuller impact. As we saw this coming towards us at WEDC, the first thing that we did was try to think about those really vulnerable businesses and those businesses that, we all know that are operating on a cash or almost a paycheck-to-paycheck basis, just making payroll, things like that. And what we wanted to do was help those businesses as quickly as we could. We had some funds that were not allocated yet from our budget. This is the interesting thing about WEDC. We're pretty flexible when it comes to a state organization. And so we were able to take $5 million and put it into what we called the SB 2020 program, the Small Business 2020 program. And it was 20 employees or less, and it was a grant of $20,000 over the course of 2 months to help pay for expenses, rent or payroll or things like that. Because what we really saw was a gap in between, the business closing and what we're now seeing come through with federal assistance. And so, although it was only $5 million, it feels like a lot, but it's really a drop in the bucket compared to what we've been going through. It was good to be able to stand up a pilot program where we're getting those resources out on the street where they can do some good. And we also learned some lessons. So as we go forward and potentially have more resources to deploy, we can understand, where are those networks that we need to reach out to? How do we find those small businesses? What are the needs of those small businesses? So it was helpful to learn and to be able to do that. The other thing that we were doing at the same time was working with the Small Business Administration for the designation of Wisconsin as a disaster area. So if you think about it, our normal disasters in Wisconsin, a flood or a tornado is some natural occurrence that you go out and you assess the damage and then you apply for relief. This is a bit of a different beast, and so we needed to work with the SBA to have that designation put in place, and we were able to do that a couple of weeks ago, and that unlocked the economic injury disaster loans, which was kind of the first phase of this SBA conversation. And now we're seeing with the CARES Act, a much more fulsome effort around the SBA and, the banks being involved in all of that. With the Safer at Home order, we had kind of our third phase of effort at WEDC, which was in the order we were designated as the entity that would help businesses navigate whether they're essential or non-essential. So the way the order was written, it's a very broad description of essential businesses in Wisconsin, and those businesses were allowed to stay open and operate. And then if you didn't find yourself in that list, you were non-essential and you had to close your doors. Well, there are some businesses that as broad as the order was written, it's not a clear-cut question. There was gray area. And so we were able to help navigate that gray area. We had a total of about 4,000 inquiries over the course of literally the last week and a half, and we're down to about 75 inquiries left. So we're feeling like we've moved those through as best we can. It didn't matter, we didn't make decisions based on big or small. We were really looking at the types of businesses and trying to be consistent with that. The last bit of work that we've really been involved in at WEDC in the last couple of weeks is the effort around PPE, personal protection equipment. Of course, everybody has heard the lots of conversation about that, and what we've seen in Wisconsin is a combination of supplies being available and wanting to access those so that we can get them to our frontline healthcare workers. We have companies that produce those supplies, produce PPE, and so going to them and getting their help in producing more. And then finally, we've seen some companies actually pivot their production and be able to produce more PPE or medical supplies as we need them. We've also had a great effort by some of our companies to help with testing kits for COVID-19, and it's just been really incredible to see the Wisconsin community, including the Wisconsin business community, come together. Obviously, we are still in a very traumatic time for the Wisconsin economy, the most, and we do continue in this until we start to see the numbers improve from a public health standpoint. And then we need to focus on restarting the economy and thinking about, what does it take to get that engine running again. And, the longer it sits cold, as we all know, in a Wisconsin winter, the harder it is to get started. And so, we're all anxious to get back and get started. But I'm also thinking about, what's it going to take for those small businesses to restart, for those businesses to have the capital to access inventory and payroll. If it's a few weeks from now, are they going to have the working capital to be able to do that? And it's not just small businesses; it's all businesses thinking about that. But in particular, those vulnerable businesses that I think are really critical to kind of our quality of life and our, the invisible fabrics of the Wisconsin economy. And I think it's really important to keep an eye on them and, work with the larger businesses who have been very supportive and have had good communication with my office and with the governor's office. So it's been an all-hands-on-deck effort at WEDC. It's a little quieter now, which gives us a chance to start thinking about the future. We are working with the governor's office on his legislative package for the state legislature. We're understanding what's coming in from the CARES Act and helping businesses access the resources there, and we'll continue all of these conversations going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you for that update. We'll move into questions if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's great.
Provide the questions. It's great to hear a perspective both present and future, right? Recognizing that so much of the situation is dynamic and we're all responding and trying to synthesize the information as it becomes available, but at the same time keeping all the plates spinning, so to speak, and having the future in mind, so that way we can be just as cognizant of our response today from a public health standpoint, but recognizing the future and recovery is so critical to sustaining or bringing life back to what we know it when that time comes in the future. The first question we have relates to the WEDC's SB 2020 grant, and as we understand, or as the question comes from someone that understands, the CDFI participants were designated in the program. Can you give an update as to the awardees and the process as it relates to accessing the SB 2020 resources?
Yeah, so one of the challenges from being the big, enormous state entity is going, from 500,000 feet all the way down to street level. And as we tried to assess how to find the most vulnerable businesses, we had a pre-existing network of CDFIs, the Community Development Financial Institutions. And we made the decision, imperfect as it is, to work with the CDFIs because of that pre-existing relationship, because they were already recipients of funds from WEDC, so all of the work that we do in the back room as far as underwriting and checking and all that had already been done, and that, so we wouldn't be delayed by that. We, last week and this week, received about $10 million worth of requests for the $5 million that we had from 8 different CDFIs. And what we were able to do was to award each of the CDFIs 80% of what they had asked for. So everybody was reduced by 20 or 21% to get to that $5 million. And all of the CDFIs, I believe, have now, in the last 24 hours, signed the contract and received the funds. So those CDFIs, what's probably best, I can share a list with you of who they are. We should probably post it on our website. I haven't made a big announcement about it, just really out of concern, because when we announced SB 2020 a couple of weeks ago, we got a ton, obviously so much interest. And I'm just hesitant to have folks think that there is another tranche of money coming out. And so we're being a little bit, we're just letting the CDFIs do their work to get the word out about it right now. But we can post a list of CDFIs on our website, and we should do that. So I'll make a note of that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think on our list, we're seeing CAP services or community assets for people out of Stevens Point, and perhaps First Nations Community Financial out of Black River Falls being 2 on the list that are relatively close to the Wisconsin Rapids or central Wisconsin area. So thanks for the question on that.
We really tried to have, as much as we could, a statewide response.
Great. The second question we've got is, we're going to talk about this after we get through this part of the briefing today, and that's the SBA resources. And perhaps you may have some insight as to best practices to unlocking federal economic impact disaster loans with SBA. And I know there's some encouragement coming from our congressional delegation to apply earlier rather than later to capture, I think, the extent of the need for Congress to continue to be nimble. But maybe you can offer some guidance or best practices as it relates to our businesses and the variety of businesses on our call today on accessing some of the federal resources that have become available.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is get a cup of coffee and you can either go to our website, which is wedc.org, or go to sba.gov and take some time with the information that's there, because there is a ton of information available, but also a ton of information coming at you, and working your way through it is going to require some patience. I also would really encourage folks to talk with their bankers, or talk with, if you work with a CDFI or an economic developer, to sit down and talk with them, because I think there are some choices that need to be made as a small business about the grant program and the loan program. The payroll protection program has a loan forgiveness piece to it, but it's important to keep in mind that if you don't pass that requirement, the loan will require payments back, and I think that those payments start in January of 21. And so just really taking the time to be thoughtful about cash flow. I know, for some businesses, for most businesses in Wisconsin, January is pretty typically a quiet time. And so, to be thinking about, like, okay, if I take on these payments, that means I'm going to have cash flow, accounting to take care of in January or February. So I think laying all the pieces together, you can start the application, and I encourage folks to do that, because, when the EDIL loans started, they were looking at about 3 weeks from completed application to funding. And so, you want to make sure that you get your application in and completed, and then, make sure that you're taking some time to think about your financials and think about that cash flow piece.
Great, thank you. And I know SBA had received such an overwhelming response that some of their web traffic was pulled down because of I should say their web resources were pulled down because of the traffic, and they've simplified some of that process. So I think your reminder about being patient, grabbing a cup of coffee, maybe a good Saturday morning project for our business owners as they get through their week here.
Yeah, and I don't at all mean to be flip about it. I just really mean, I think it's really hard. And, so to give yourself a little bit of space to be able to do it, I think is really important.
Great, thank you. The next question comes from Kyle, and the question is the governor's office working towards creating parameters for non-essential businesses to operate within certain means and under certain conditions, specifically or particularly, I should say, if the general health and well-being of the community are protected? So an example of that might be a local small business retailer that's operating, would normally operate in a brick and mortar retail storefront fashion, but has been deemed non-essential and therefore closed, but could operate through online sales, mail, or delivery. Maybe you could weigh in on that question.
Yeah, we received a fair number of questions about that, and there's a provision in the non-essential portion that allows for minimal business operations, and I'm not going to be able to quote it right now, but I'm pretty sure in the FAQs, the frequently asked questions, there's some clarifying guidance that allows for managing of inventory, and that has been determined to be able to do those online sales. So I would encourage you to look, again, that's at wedc.org, and you can see the language about the parameters around that.
Thank you. Next question comes from Michelle, and it pertains to golf courses. The Wisconsin Rapids area, like many parts of the state, have a predominance of golf courses. And there was a Dunn County judge decision citing the ability for golf courses to open. Again, it was more of a local decision to walk courses, not use golf carts. So this comes from a golf course here in the city that's wondering about the potential to reopen their courses. Maybe you could weigh in on golf courses as we get into the spring months here.
Yeah, the golf courses are deemed non-essential under the order. That was a decision made based on the way the order is framed. You have to you can't list every business, and so golf courses have not been included as essential, especially because of the clubhouse issues, bathroom issues, the use of carts and things like that. I think that folks still have plenty of opportunity to get out and walk and do things like that. And, so for the time being, There's not going to be any changes in that. I do think that if we were in a position where Safer at Home were extended for some period of time. Safer at Home was written, mostly in the winter. I mean, it was only 2 weeks ago, but it still felt like winter. So I think, as we look at different, like you mentioned, going into the spring and things like that. But for right now, really, the focus of the governor's office is on making sure that we're taking care of public health issues and taking care of, the medical supplies and PPE and things like that. So for right now, we're holding steady.
Great, thank you. Yeah, very very much a dynamic situation. I think that's the word is thrown around most often about the current state of affairs. The next question comes from our chat from Amy. Amy's wondering if there's any help from WEDC if you borrowed locally and did not work with the CDFI. Do they have any specific programs that have been announced at WEDC in that regard?
We have not announced any further programs. Like I mentioned, we were kind of looking at this bridge between the moment of, COVID really hitting the Wisconsin economy until federal funds came in. And our focus right now is to be watching what happens with the federal funds and then to be looking for those gaps and those places where the federal funds aren't reaching and thinking about how we can help those businesses. So what we're doing right now is kind of studying that and understanding that. If Amy has any input on, her type of business and if she's falling through the cracks, I would like to hear that. And then we will, we do have some resources left yet in our fiscal year, which ends in the end of June. And, I think we're hoping to maybe deploy some of those resources to those places where there are real gaps and where we see need. So if Amy has input on that, it's great to hear because it's hard to really understand, to see those gaps.
Great, thank you for the invitation on that. We'll see if Amy chimes in with some clarification. We'll go to another question. There's, in light of the moratorium on evictions for residential and commercial tenants, there are questions emerging from business owners or management groups with regards to real estate, the real estate owners, and if there's any resources or backstop for property owners when their tenants cannot pay them rent, probably from a cash flow perspective, I'm assuming, and maybe you've referenced that in the SBA pieces, but maybe you want to address that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the intention of the SBA loans and grants are to help pay those monthly expenses, the mortgage or the rent. I think that's the intention also of making sure that unemployment is accessible to as many people as need it. But I think what you're describing is kind of that secondary domino or third domino or fourth domino of what we see happening here. So as we see cash flow tightening up, decisions are made not to pay rent, then that landlord can't make their mortgage, and it's a slippery slope. And so I would encourage folks, no matter what in this situation, to have open conversations with everybody so that we can all understand, all right, I know where you're at, and now I can plan for what I need to do. So I think it's really important to be doing as much as we can to let each other know what situation we're in.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question we have relates to somewhat of the governor's definition on essential versus non-essential. Construction was broadly construed as essential, and so I think our county health department and maybe law enforcement, both here at the city and at the county level, are receiving questions. So do you anticipate any further clarification on construction being deemed, certain aspects of construction being deemed essential and non-essential?
I just was looking at the construction definition, and most construction is allowed, including residential construction. It says to avoid aesthetic or somewhat unnecessary construction, and then that being then non-essential. I have not heard nor seen any intention to change that. One of the things that we are doing proactively is having conversations with many different industries, manufacturing or construction, to help think about best practices that can be deployed to those workplaces. So if you think about it, having two construction workers in a pickup truck together is not social distancing. And so providing that kind of thoughtfulness and advice to the industry so that they can put in best practices and we can keep flattening the curve on COVID-19. The manufacturers have put together a list of best practices that include, reviewing your workplace and looking for choke points or staggering shifts, moving workstations so that folks are social distance away. So I think there's a lot that businesses are doing and can be doing. If they're able to stay open, then I think they also, should be taking up this effort to make sure that the workplace is safe. And we've received a fair number of inquiries from employees who are concerned that their workplace is not safe. And we've really encouraged those employees to go back and have a cooperative conversation with their employer and, point out places, hey, I don't think I'm safe here, or this isn't, we need to clean this more often. So hopefully those conversations are happening.
Wonderful. Thank you. Looks like we've reached the end of our queue for questions, but I do have a clarification from Amy, who speaks comes to us as a restaurant owner. She states that she's grateful to have many resources to provide for their employees, but as owners are struggling to find funds to move fast enough to save their businesses. She states that we cannot do this. What we cannot do is take on more debt, and rent is covered, but only mortgage interest and SBA. And so they need help. She's asking for assistance and help with the cost of revamping their business models, etc.
Okay, with technical assistance and things like that. I would encourage, Amy, every city and county has economic developers, and also the SBDC, the Small Business Development Centers, are online, and there are folks available to help with technical assistance and things like that. And so I would encourage Amy to reach out for that kind of support locally and to really see where that help could come from.
Great. Thanks for the mention on those other resources. I know our chamber's on the call, and those are ones that they often tout folks as well.
Yeah, the chambers are, I think are going to play a critical role here in helping businesses both access resources, but also think about just kind of the challenges that Amy is putting forward. And, as businesses start to reopen, you could imagine that, as my father would say, God willing, Amy is able to open her restaurant. She's going to need to also understand any kind of health restriction, health and safety restrictions she needs to put in place in her restaurant, not only from a regulatory point of view, but also, what are the customers going to be concerned about? And every business, as they open, is going to be kind of opening in a new light of a post-COVID-19 light. And I think that, the chambers and the business advisors that we have in all of our communities can really serve a critical role in helping businesses be successful as they reopen their doors.
Excellent. Well, my final question comes from myself, and I guess anyone else that's in an agency leadership role or organizational role in our community. Are you seeing or hearing anything around the state that you would like to convey to us as leaders in our current roles?
I think that what I'm seeing is, what's the best way to put it? I don't want to say excitement, but I can't think of a better word, but a readiness to face this challenge together. And I know my team at WEDC is eager to innovate new ideas and to think of ways to help businesses. And so, as leaders, I think we all should be giving folks that opportunity to look at things in a different way. I'd like to turn challenges into opportunities, and so to be thinking about, what are the opportunities presented. Before COVID-19, we faced workforce challenges, we faced housing challenges. What are those things that we can do innovatively in this moment? What are the doors that are opened by this, as hard as it is? there's always a door opening somewhere. So.
Thank you. Well, on that note, Secretary Hughes, I certainly appreciate you willing to take some time to brief us all today, answer a number of questions from us all. It really means a lot to your early tenure in your role, your approachability, and look forward to welcoming you to Wisconsin Rapids after all this is over to tour the many great projects that WEDC is participating in Wisconsin Rapids. It's great to have your leadership at WEDC and your vision, as well as your energy in addressing local communities like ours in Wisconsin Rapids. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll come visit you soon.
Great. Have a nice weekend.
All right. Thank you. You too.
Take care. Be well. Great. Well, thank you. We'll move into the next portion of our briefing today. I've got a couple of comments for all of you. We can go probably to the next slide there, Emily. Oops, I just lost my thing. A couple of points, the first of which relates to community spread. As you'll see in regional news reports, health department briefings, and Christy will probably talk about this when she gets to her portion of our day, but we should assume that community spread in Wood County and in Wisconsin Rapids is occurring. Due to the limitations with testing and lab overhead and criteria set forth as it relates to who gets tested, we need to continue to conduct ourselves and our movement through the community, recognizing that one or more of us might be carriers, we might be asymptomatic at the time being, so we need to continue to practice that social and physical distancing. And as it relates to the next point on essential tasks, while the governor's safer at home order allows for all of us to seek necessary services or supplies for ourselves or for our family members or household members, we must continue to consider social distancing and physical distancing guidelines when we plan our travel. Earlier this week there was a study that based upon a data source rated different counties, and Wood County didn't rate so great, and so we've got some work to do into ensuring that our average daily travel isn't more than just essential. We also encourage folks to continue to shop for essential supplies during non-peak times. If you've got childcare resources, or if your employees have childcare resources, do the shopping when those when their young ones are maybe at childcare, and shop with as few family members as feasible. I know a lot of the national retailers, Home Depot and Walmart and the likes of those, are starting to implement further restrictions as it relates to how many people are entering the stores, and really precautions to keep their team members safe. But we can't stress this enough that given your personal situation, shop with as few family members as feasible, and limit those trips to essential tasks. If you could make it to once a week, that's advisable. We also encourage you to shop with those local businesses. I know, speaking with owners and store managers like Merlin over at the Quality Foods stores, those stores are doing their best to keep their supplies up, and we want to support our local businesses as much as we can, like Merlin in our community. And I would expect that because their stores are smaller, there's less likelihood of crowds, and so I encourage you to consider that as you consider your shopping habits. The other piece, we talked about essential businesses with Secretary Hughes, but we want to remind folks that our police department and fire department, health department, sheriff's department are all working collectively to ensure consistent application of the essential business designation. While at the city and others, I don't believe citations are being issued, but it's our hope that folks are voluntarily complying with these ordinances or with these rules and the orders, because the last thing we want to do is be issuing citations or penalties given the health crisis that we're experiencing. The other mention I'll make relates to city operations. We continue to adapt our city operations. City Hall remains generally closed to the public, but as it relates to the next item, voting, we still have early in-person voting happening at City Hall until 5 p.m. Folks can still request an absentee ballot online via vote.wi.gov. And if folks are needing to work with a city staff member, I know we're rotating shifts and schedules here at City Hall, and I encourage you to do so in your businesses for your key staff where you may not have redundancy, to stagger schedules and institute telework and remote work procedures where you can. Certainly that's not new information, and that's just want to remind folks of that. As of 2:53 today, this April 7th election is going to be held, but that there is obviously developments happening on that front quite regularly. So we are instituting safety precautions at our polling places to ensure that that hand sanitizer and gloves and face shields and separation barriers are being created between folks that are voting and our poll workers. The city stands in a pretty decent position with poll workers right now. We've got a fair amount of non-essential staff that we've reprioritized to assist us on election day. But you know, if we do be on the lookout for other municipalities in our region that don't have enough poll workers to conduct their election. I know there's been some reports about National Guard and such, but we haven't seen those resources come to our area. So we'd encourage folks to be watching out for potential last-minute requests or volunteer opportunities or employment opportunities at the polling places. And then lastly, on the screen, we've got listed a COVID-19 Economic Recovery Task Force. Part of my question for Secretary Hughes was wondering if there's other communities around the state that are actively standing up these recovery task force ideas. And essentially what we're considering here in Wisconsin Rapids would be a cross-sector, cross-representation from community organizations and resources, from philanthropy to community resources, nonprofits, that all might be able to come together to understand the trends, like the questions that Amy raised or others that have on their mind, how we can continue to band together and provide the resources to make sure that as the crisis dissipates, our economic crisis can continue to be addressed, so we don't end up coming out of this in a major slump. Our community has been there before, and I think many of us don't want to have to go back there with higher levels of unemployment and joblessness and other crises that may come as a result of economic challenge and loss. So I want to mention that to you all. More information will be forthcoming on that. These briefing calls we hope will evolve into something that the task force can take on. Right now, it's just a good practice, I think, for all of us to be able to pull together and share these resources out for everyone's benefit. So in the spirit of time, I'm going to move on to Christy. Actually, one quick mention, the SBA disaster loans, they were brought up during Secretary Hughes' briefing. Encourage everyone to go to sba.gov/disaster to get access to the application and the advance, the $10,000 advance that might be available for potential forgiveness on the loan as well. So we'll move into the Health Department briefing. Christy, we'll turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us again today.
All right, thanks, Mayor Verwink. What I've got for you guys today is some updated numbers. We still hold at 2 positive, and both of those positive tests, those individuals have recovered. We have 209 negative tests that have been done in Wood County. In the state, 1,912 positive test results, 22,377 negative, and we had 37 deaths attributed to COVID-19, up 6 from yesterday. So those infographics, that snapshot of that is available on our county website every day. We update that, as well as on our Facebook page, our Health Department Facebook page. Can advance, thank you. A couple of things for today. Wood County River Block building will be closed to the public starting April 6th. A press release will be going out about that later this afternoon as well. For an up-to-date listing of all of the services still being provided, you can check the Wood County website, as well as call any of the organizations that are currently located in the River Block building. As far as essential travel, I know Secretary Hughes had said this as well. People should really only be traveling for essential travel. There's no other reason to be traveling. And we are expecting that that's the only travel that is happening per the ban. Much like Mayor Verwink said, we really want people to be going to the store once per week, and one person in the household. If possible, the same person should be going, just to limit your chance of infection. We understand this is not capable for everyone or available for everyone to do, single parent households and such, but do your best and plan ahead in those situations. Try to plan to go once a week, once every 2 weeks if you can. Carry-out dining, of course, we still want to be supporting our local businesses, but curbside should be what people are doing, not going into businesses and restaurants. It's very difficult for people to be physical distancing inside restaurants, especially if you're waiting for if there's a number of people waiting for food. So carry-out should be done curbside, and I know a number of restaurant owners are meeting that need and able to provide curbside. As far as outdoor activities, I know golf courses, it was mentioned that they are not deemed essential. Secretary Hughes mentioned you can be outside, you can go for walks, you can go for your bike rides, you can be in your yard, but stay in your neighborhood and do those things in your neighborhood. Don't be traveling to do those things. Mental health is really important, so getting outside and getting fresh air is very important, and we want you to do that, but be smart about how you're doing that. And when you're walking in your neighborhood, keep your distancing with your neighbors. That 6 feet social distancing is really important. I wanted to let you all know that we are working closely with our partners on an isolation facility for potential COVID infected individuals, and also for working closely with our healthcare systems for this facility also may serve for healthcare workers who have been exposed, who don't want to go back to their residence and be with their family and expose their family. We're currently working on the plans, and I'll continue to update everyone on those items. We're reaching out to organizations currently in the north and south end of the county to find out if organizations that would be willing to be a facility of such, so hotels and others. Again, the essential businesses that are open, not only for the public but also for working. If you're not working remotely as an employee, your business needs to be following social or physical distancing guidelines. We've been receiving a lot of complaints from grocery stores and businesses not adhering to physical distancing guidelines, and we've been working closely with these businesses, our health officer, myself, and one of our public health nurses. I know they're doing their best, they're trying really hard, and we're just trying to provide them with tools to be able to do it better. They want everyone to be safe and healthy as well. And then we're just, again, reminding people traveling outside of your community is not what we want to see happening right now. And if you do travel outside of your community, you need to quarantine for 14 days, especially if you travel to areas like Milwaukee and Madison where they have much larger numbers than we do. Obviously, maybe not obviously, but this does include essential work that you've been doing, or if you work in a community that you have to travel for, right? If you have to travel to Wausau, if you have to travel to another place, that is essential. That is something you've been doing. But if you're going to Milwaukee, Madison, we are advising that you don't do that, and that if you do, you need to quarantine. It's getting to the point now where Wood County, our health officer, is willing to issue quarantine orders if people are refusing to quarantine for travel, and it's made known that you're traveling. And I think that's the last of my updates. If anyone has any questions about anything related to health or public health, I'm happy to answer those.
Christy, we do have a question that I've heard on some occasion related to the media coverage that seems to perhaps downplay or give residents the satisfaction or false feeling or false expectation maybe, or unrealistic belief that Wood County's in the clear. You know, we've had 2 positive cases. Those folks have since recovered, fortunately. Maybe you can address that. It gets to that community spread question, but I realize community spread's an unfamiliar term for folks. And the second part of that question is about drive-in testing. Right now, there aren't any drive-in testing centers, and I understand there might be one in adjacent Portage County or Stevens Point.
Yeah, both are great questions, and you alluded to this earlier. We are operating under the fact that you at this time can assume community spread has happened. There are a lot of limitations on testing due to volume. I mean, this is because of the pandemic. It's you're seeing on the national news. It's happening in other countries. It's much worse in many states in the U.S. And in order to deal with the struggles and the backlog, tiers were set up for testing. And so what had been being told to people was if you're symptomatic and you likely could have COVID-19, they were told to go home and isolate and quarantine themselves, and for 14 days or until 72 hours after their last onset of symptoms. And so we believe that there's many more people here in our community that have it. It's just a matter of that people weren't being tested because of the backlog. So absolutely, community spread is real, and it's here. The term community spread, to give you clarification around that, our nurses do contract tracing for anyone that tests positive. And if you're not able to determine a location by which somebody contracted the disease or the virus, then it can be assumed community spread has happened. And that has been specifically assumed already in Marathon County and in other counties, Clark County, which are right next to us. So we know the state health office is saying community spread is throughout Wisconsin. We are not, no counties in the clear, and we're just going to continue to see those numbers rise as the tests catch up. There was an article, I think I mentioned this last week, but remember the results we're getting today are from tests that were done, 8 to 10 days ago. And so there was an article about a positive test in Marshfield, and the woman who was tested actually wanted to do the article. She wanted people to know what was going on, to just, take away some of the negative things that were being said and really bring truth to what was being said. So by the time her positive test came to us, she was already almost done with isolation and done with quarantine. So that's where that assuming community spread makes a lot of sense. As far as drive-through testing, we currently don't have that in our community, but that it is my understanding in talking with our healthcare partners that likely will be at least in one case available in the future. So there's that update too.
Great, thanks, Christy. And I think another question that we continue to see posed is, as folks maybe get stuck in a groove of watching a lot of national news, and maybe better or worse, I don't have the time, unfortunately, right now to watch it, nor do I generally spend outside of a pandemic watch a lot of national news, but a lot being reported in New York and California and places about stand-up hospital centers. And I know Wisconsin and Wood County, on the briefing calls that I participated in, takes the surge planning and surge preparation very seriously. And so I think for the benefit of everyone on the call, there are contingency plans being discussed as we get to different levels of intervention, I would say, based upon volume or thresholds or critical mass of folks that are coming into contact or testing positive. Did you have anything, Christy, on that front that you'd want to mention while we've got folks that might be interested in that information?
Yeah, that's a great point. There is a lot of planning happening, surge planning at both of our health system, both of our amazing health system partners in our communities. There's also, there's estimates out there. There's a lot of different models. It's hard to know which one to follow, but one that we've been shared with from at least the state health office is predicting, end of in the 20s, early to mid 20s of April, that we will be seeing the surge, and they're estimating around 25 deaths per day in Wisconsin at that rate. So as you can imagine, knowing that definitely our healthcare partners are gearing up for surge, they're ready. We're also doing some mortuary planning for this. Just knowing that if we don't continue to stay safer at home and people don't, what really can happen, the things we have to be prepared for, and there's a lot of that happening already. I would say our county partners, our local, we have a lot of business partners are all really working hard at being together, doing this together, at being prepared together, and hopefully we are prepared and we don't have to use a lot of these things.
Great, thank you for addressing that. We'll go to the next slide, Emily. And certainly last but not least, we've got State Representative Scott Krug, who has joined us. I know he was on the video screen. I saw him wearing his Brewer gear. Scott, how are the Brewers doing so far this season?
I think I saw a game last night from 1987 that they won and a no-hitter, 1-0 or 6-0. So got to relive some of that stuff. I'm chomping at the bit to use some of this gear, obviously, but times are different, so we got other things going on. So I just wanted to take some time and kind of talk a little bit today about what we might see for potential legislation to kind of help out with some of the things that are going on. I think our big focus, as far as our caucus goes, is making sure that any legislation that we get done over the next week or so is going to be directly related to COVID-19. I think we saw some proposals coming out that had other issues kind of rolled up into that. I don't think we're interested in taking on some of those things at this time. Understanding, though, that there will be a time for that. Our state budget is going to be heavily impacted by what's going on right now in the state of the economy. Our first year in our budget obviously is paid for and dollars are out the door. But in a 2-year budget, our second year of our state budget is going to be a little messy. So there's going to be some things that are going to have to be adjusted at that time. I think as far as COVID-related bills that the legislature can tackle, I think there's a few categories that I want to see us work on next week. One in particular actually came from Zach in the City of Wisconsin Rep is dealing with property taxes and flexibility for property tax payments, waiving fees for late payments, and waiving interest on property tax collections, giving municipalities an extra installment collection period perhaps, or delaying it. Just that general flexibility in property taxes, knowing the impact that's occurring on people and their small businesses in the community right now. So that's number one on our priority list here locally. I think second, we wanted to make sure that we're making sure that Missy and WEDC have the funds that they need. We are in a tough spot right now with businesses and how they're impacted currently. But as Zach mentioned earlier too, we've got to start looking forward to a recovery time. And one of the things we can do as policymakers is make sure that WEDC has the funds to help startups, to help people reinvest in their business, to help people get back on their feet, to make sure employees are made whole again. So we really want to target quite a chunk of our efforts here from the federal dollars that are coming in towards WEDC and getting those dollars to small businesses. I think, honestly, the federal government did a huge bill, right, as a $2 trillion stimulus. But when it comes down to it, in the end, when you've got as many businesses impacted as they are, that's not going to go as far as it should. Not everybody's going to be able to take advantage of it. Not everybody's going to be made whole. I mean, that's one of the things that we're always going to struggle with. So I think the state can take advantage of incoming federal dollars and some of those dollars we have available to us in our state budget to add to that availability of funds for businesses. I think the last thing I wanted to talk about that we really wanted to do is on the business side for the unemployment fund. We heard from Secretary Frostman at DWD yesterday that our fund had been sitting at about a $2 billion balance. And when people start talking, numbers in millions and billions, it's hard to comprehend. But during the Great Recession, we had been down to about $1.5 billion that we had to borrow from the federal government for our fund. Now we're sitting at $2 billion. Starting this fund, that fund will be depleted. It is not going to take very long for us to get $2 billion out the door for unemployment claims that are coming in, especially when we're seeing 100,000 claims in days and numbers in the weeks that surpass the Great Recession right now. So we need to make sure as state leaders and policymakers that we're not leaving that all on the business community to pull UI dollars out of their funds for something that we didn't, that they didn't cause, that we caused them. So when the state issued the stay-at-home order and issued businesses to close, that should be something that we're helping them prop up in their unemployment fund and reimbursing them for the costs that are coming out of that fund right now. So we need to make sure that those areas are made whole. We need to make sure that we're doing short-term protections for people who have utility disconnections. We need to deal with the renter-homeowner situations. The governor has got the restriction right now in his executive order to ban the foreclosures and evictions and things like that right now. That is kind of on shaky ground as far as legality goes, so we need to codify and solidify some of the language around that. There is a whole myriad of things that we could go into session for next week. I mean, we could prop up so many different things, but there's a limited pot of money like always. So I think those are the biggest areas we need to focus on. We're going to be having another caucus call today. We're doing them Monday, Wednesday, Friday to hone in on the parts of Governor Evers' package that are going to be able to be something we can work together on. Pick the easy fruit, the low-hanging fruit, and get those things done right away, while we continue to negotiate some of the other things that may not necessarily be COVID directly related. So I think with that, I would turn it back and just let you know that as policymakers, we're standing at the forefront here to take questions and concerns. We've dealt with just as many things as WEDC has on essentialness. I wanted to put out there that some municipalities are going a little bit farther with cease and desist orders for essential businesses, and I don't think we need to get that far. I think we've been doing a good job in our community on making sure people are protected and safe. So I give credit to the health department and to city administration and Zach to make sure that everybody's understanding that we don't want to take further steps, and we can make sure that we get these things done together as long as we focus on what's important and what needs to be dealt with right away. So in the interest of time, I'd turn it back and let us move on.
Thanks so much, Sam, for sharing that perspective. And if there are questions, we'd encourage folks to ask them in the chat. I do have a question, Christy, as it relates to leaving the community and community spread, visiting state parks. I know the governor had issued waivers, fee waivers for state park access, and I know we've got a great amount of city and county parks. We're encouraging folks to get out. What's a best practice as it relates to traveling to some of those places for emotional and mental well-being?
You know, at this time, I wish I could tell you that I want people to be going there, but at this time, when people travel, they have to stop, oftentimes either to get gas, to go to the bathroom. There's shared spaces that you're going to be in contact with other people when you go visit those places. And so in our opinion as health professionals, and this is a united front coming across, I would say all health departments in the state, that at this time, just reserve your recreation activities to your neighborhood and stay home. Don't go to these communities where there's community spread more than what we have, where the numbers are higher. And unfortunately, I mean, I'm an active outdoor. I'm a runner, a biker. My family, we visit and do all of those things, and it's hard for me to say, but I really don't.
Great, thanks, Christy. So we don't have any other questions in the chat queue, and just in the spirit of efficiency with everyone's time, we're just over our 1 hour. We've got almost 100 people on the call, so I don't think we're going to be able to open up the lines for question and answer. But we want to remind folks that we're all available and accessible to you all. My email address, Angel's email address from the chambers on here as well, phone numbers. Feel free to reach out to any of us either through those means or social media. Again, we want to be as responsive to you. We may not always have the answer right away. I think folks that have asked me or the others can probably agree. There's sometimes where we just don't have the answer, but we're going to follow up and do our darndest to get you the answer that you're seeking, especially as guidance and information changes. So that concludes the call. Emily, I think there was one more slide. Want to remind folks to follow the City of Wisconsin Rapids on Facebook. The Health Department page is also available on Facebook. Community members that have general questions, call 211 and sign up for Nixle alerts through Wood County Dispatch. It's local.nixle.com. And then view the respective websites, both of the Chamber and the City, for coronavirus information as it's forthcoming. So information gets shared daily as it relates to counts, but I wouldn't fixate on the information that you see on case count. Again, let's conduct ourselves such that coronavirus is in existence in our community amongst people that are not being tested, and so we should conduct ourselves accordingly. In conclusion, thanks again for taking time. We're going to publish another update about this in the near future, so probably same time, same place next Friday. So thank you all very much for your attention, and I wish you all a great weekend, and be well. Take care.